Hello and welcome to the B2B Comms Breakdown. It's our last live of 2024. We decided to have December off. Also, if we were going to be doing this in December, it would have been the 20th, and we figured that people aren't really going to be thinking about coming along to a live, might have other things on their mind. Anyway, for our last live, we have an absolutely cracking topic. We've got lots to talk about, but first, let me introduce myself. I'm Stacey Meadwell, former B2B property journalist turned content creator, moderator, and media trainer working with businesses in the built environment.
And I am the other host of this one. I am Ayo Abbas. I am a marketing consultant and I work predominantly with architects and engineers, and I deliver services in terms of like strategy, content creation, speaking and training services.
Now, we're going to launch into the topic in a moment, but if you are watching live and joining us live, please do put a comment on the page so we can know that people are watching live, because we don't know otherwise, because we're just talking to ourselves, and it's always good to know that people are watching. So the topic today is a great panel or roundtable, can be talked about long after the event. It's good for boosting your reputation and generating reams of cracking content. A good podcast puts you in the ear of potential clients and collaborators and builds connection, authority, and reputation. But it only works with careful planning, structure, and knowing what your goals are to fully deliver. We have people saying hello, and I can see them on the screen.
Yay!
That's great. Hello, Barry. Hello, Gavin. That's great to see that, to know that people are watching, and also that I can see we're using a new platform today, so it's a bit of a learning curve as to what we can see in the studio.
Can I say what she did to me? She turned around and she said, "If you don't give me the slides for later on and get on here in time, I'm telling you off. We're not doing it."
Well,
I am a last-minute merchant.
I wanted, yes, I was very, very last minute. Anyway, so as I was saying, it requires careful planning, structure, knowing what your goals are. Now, between the two of us, we have an absolute ton of experience hosting events and panels and podcasts. I'm going to get those two mixed up a lot. Now, Ayo has her own successful podcast called The Built Environment Marketing Show, which you should give a listen, which is great. And I have chaired many a panel and roundtable, including at big international events like MIPIM, if you've heard of that.
And I guess in terms of me, I have attended quite a fair few events, as I generally do go out quite a lot, and over the years. And I listen to a ridiculous number of podcasts every week, including Gavin's. Actually, Gavin's got a new podcast out, which is very good, all about investment, which is really interesting. So we've been comparing notes and observations of all the stuff we've learned. And so for the next 20 minutes, we are going to share some of the we're going to have discussions around some of the mistakes we're seeing, the impact that they have, but also how you can avoid them. And we're also going to look at how you can, I guess, set up panels or podcasts for success. And as And as always, we'd love you to hear from you in terms of your questions, your ideas, and your thoughts in the comments. And we'll respond towards the end. Sorry, I left to drink some water.
You okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Shall I get the slides? This is a big test. I'm going to now try and get some. We have a slide. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. We can see it, but hopefully you, the audience, can see. Just let us know if you can see the slide.
So to kick us off, I actually ran a poll this week on LinkedIn, as I always do, which I love doing, which was all about podcasts and panels and what turns people off about them when it comes to them. And it was really interesting because I loved some of the comments and the results. So having no clear structure was a clear winner. Too many speakers, which is actually one of my biggest bugbears. Boring topic. Who wants boring? And then we had some great comments like this from Anne Storr when she said, she went to an event where there were 3 speakers. One told amazing story, told us why they were storytelling, but didn't tell us any stories, which is a bit weird. One was super prepped and useful and great. And another kind of spent an hour delivering a mini workshop about his uncle or second cousin, who is an author, a legendary author, including 3 or 4 slides. So that third speaker went a bit rogue. So it was chaos, is what she said. I did learn and useful stuff in the workshop, but it could have been half the time. And that's the bit that stands out for me. It could have been half the time. So it's trying to make it so that if I'm spending my time at your panel, watching your panel or listening to your podcast, how do you make it so that I get an amazing experience is a key takeaway from me. And some of the other comments we had as well were from Hilary, who I know who's based in South Africa. It's a combination of all three. Too many speakers dilutes the audience's attention, and without a clear structure, that dilution is exasperated. And while even very boring topics can be made intriguing and fascinating by great speakers, if you've got one or two in place, then three will lose the audience completely. So don't be boring, dull, and have no structure. Definitely not. And Ray Newman also, he's a podcast. He loves content and he's a writer as well. He commented that for podcasts, the turnoffs are poor sound and production quality and awkward, uncomfortable hosts. And for me as a podcast producer as well as host, that's one of the things that I always think of. How do I have really good sound, but also how do I make my guests feel really comfortable? So yeah, let's move on, Stace.
Yeah, so we've touched upon some of the mistakes, and we're going to dive into a few more mistakes and what the impact of making those mistakes has on your event and podcast. So Ayo, do you want to hit us with the first mistake?
Do you want to take the slides?
Oh, yes, sorry.
It's all right, don't worry. Should be the same button.
There we go.
Yay, we're back.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sophie, for saying that you can see the slides. That's very helpful. And actually, before we launch in, if you do have a question or you've got a comment or something that we talk about, just put it in the comments because we'd love to hear from you what your thoughts are.
Okay, so my first kind of mistake that I see in panels and podcasts is only sharing about it once. And I think it's that thing of people just don't promote things enough. And I think it's that thing of they think, oh, shared about it once, everyone will know. It's like, no, they won't. You have to keep talking about it, talking about the same thing, but in a slightly different way. Like we do, we talk about polls when we publicize our lives. We also do direct invites. We put them in our newsletters. We have them on all social media channels, not just LinkedIn. So we are literally spreading it. And we do that ideally over 2 weeks, but sometimes we don't have the time and it's a few days. But that's kind of it. You have to really, really make sure that you are sharing and promoting it. And for podcasts, for me, I have a 2-week lead time with an episode where I will post probably 2 or 3 times each week, just to make sure that people see it. And that's the key thing, is make sure you have to keep promoting.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, if you're promoting on social media, not everybody is going to be online when you're posting. Not everybody will see it. So it's just important just to really kind of keep an overpromote. And it feels awkward. It's the same with events or podcasts. You've got to promote because people will not find out about it otherwise.
And then if you do that, that means you don't get the listens or you don't get the people coming to actually watch your event. So promotion has got to be a mistake you need to avoid.
Yeah. Is it me next? Yes, me next.
It is.
My mistake that I think, and this has already been touched on in the comments on your poll, Ayo, is unstructured conversations. And this goes for podcasts and panels. If there's no logic or flow, if it's very stilted, there's a Q&A, the host is asking one question to every panelist each time. It doesn't make it a good experience. The impact of this is people won't listen if it's a podcast, if it's just a ramble. I know there are sort of celebrity podcast hosts who have a podcast that is about a ramble and that's their raison d'etre. But that works because they're a celebrity and they have celebrity guests. Make sure that there is some structure there to the conversation. The host needs to draw everything together, and we're going to talk a bit about sort of the role of the host and the things that they need to do in the second part of this conversation. So I'm just going to leave unstructured conversations there.
Leave it slightly open. Leave them wanting more, Stacey.
Absolutely.
I think the other bugbear, which actually I do see a lot out there, is having too many panelists and guests. Now, I know like a lot of our industry kind of events and panels they are pay to play, right? So to get as me as a sponsor or someone who's shelling out 10K or whatever for that panel, I want to get my most value. But then like having 5 or 6 people on a panel, I kind of sit there and think, this isn't the best way to have a conversation or for anyone to see the best in themselves. So it's like you have to try really hard to make that a good panel. So yeah, that is one of my bugbears, of having too many people. But also it means that you can't necessarily understand the different voices or the different messages. And there's not really enough time for anyone to really speak or get their message out. So I think that is one of my biggest bugbears. But also, as a host, when there's too many people on the panel, it's quite hard to manage that conversation and really kind of make it engaging. So for me, that's the having too many people on the platform, and in terms of podcasts, if you have too many people, you won't know whose voice is whose. And that's the hardest thing. I think there's a few things you can do to help that, but it does make it a much harder listen again.
So my next mistake is boring topics and echo chamber guests. We've all been to a panel that has been really boring. And I mean, I used to say back in the day when I was chairing question time debates when I was a journalist, I used to say to our events team, if I can go down the list of panelists and tell you exactly what each of them are going to say, it's not going to make for an interesting conversation. And this comes back to the point about having a structured discussion. It's knowing what are the key things that you want to talk about, but having a good theme from the outset. You know, is it something that people are genuinely interested in? Is there enough stuff to explore? Are you telling people what they already know? I mean, there's always value in sort of people having their views confirmed, but if everybody is on the same page, it doesn't make for a very interesting discussion. And, you know, I'm sure we'll touch upon this later. We've got, you know, we've got lots of examples where this has happened, and you know, it's just been everybody saying the same thing and on the same page. It's not very interesting for the audience. And, you know, anyway, I'm going to leave it there because we've got more. We've got so much more to say, but we're going to come on to talk about how you get around this when we talk about how you plan for. We promise when you talk about planning for success.
It's so funny planning this episode actually, because we were like, how do we stop this from turning into a whinge fest? Just like this and that, and we were just literally like, this list just grew and grew and grew. But yeah, even we had to have a structure.
Yes, which we're trying to stick to. We're doing
quite well, I think.
Yeah.
So the other thing about it is, for me, we always talk about content repurposing and just kind of thinking about the panel or the podcast that you're doing and then what you can do next with that output. And I think that's one of the things, is that, you know, events and panels and podcasts, they take a lot of time and resource. Your guests, it's their time as well. So how do you kind of make sure that you're not limited by actually only 5 people showed up, so therefore only 5 people saw that content or any of that stuff. So I think, how can you kind of maximize the kind of content and the repurpose what you've got from it? So if you don't do that, then you're limiting the shelf life of the actual event itself.
Absolutely, and we've got a lot more to say about some of the things that you can do with a panel event or a podcast to extend its shelf life. So those are all kind of key mistakes. But how do you make sure that your panel or podcast is a success? I'm going to kick off. And I'm not going to say a massive amount on this because it's something I'm going to come back to as we go through the conversation. Goals. It's knowing what you actually want to achieve with your event. What does success look like? It's a question I often ask when I'm getting involved in events, and I've been asked to host this. Like, what do you actually want to achieve? What do you want the audience to walk away thinking and feeling at the end of this? Because this is crucial. I mean, obviously there are business goals, but also you need to think about how that influences and impacts your goals for the audience. And I'm going to come back to audience in a moment, but on to you, Ayo.
So I guess planning for success, like I said earlier, about people not promoting their event enough. So in terms of how to promote your event, for me, I like to kind of like write weird kind of mind maps of like all the ideas of where something can go on a single page, but it's just very much about utilizing things like your email list, your social media, your website. You know, if you've got people you're collaborating with or networks who may be interested in your event or your panel or your podcast, how can you share assets with them? And I always think it's like a lot of my job as a marketer is like not just say things once, but to say basically the same thing over and over and over again, so that it actually gets into someone's psyche and they realize and they hear it. Because you think about the sheer number of kind of messages that we all see every day, it's a lot. So it's like, how do you get something to sink in? And that's repetition, really. And also, I think this whole thing about allowing enough time to promote. You know, ideally, you want to have a kind of good run in. You want to kind of announce the speakers. You want to kind of give people assets so they can share with their communities. So how can you really, really promote? And a really simple tip actually as well is if it's an event or a panel or something like that, how can you send some kind of calendar invite so it pops up in someone's diary? That's how I show up for most stuff. I'd miss half my world otherwise. And I think it's just I really would. So it's just how do you get that in someone's diary? Because if it's not there, might not show up.
And the thing is, what I'd add to that is with podcasts, it takes a while to build an audience. It's not like you're going to put out an episode and suddenly everybody is listening to your podcast. Yeah. So, you know, you put out an episode, promote it to within an inch of its life, but then promote it again later down the line. You know, if you're doing a series, keep promoting. You know, if you've got a couple of episodes out, promote the first episode alongside the second episode, because it takes time. It's a fairly new medium.
I actually,
you know, if you're doing a podcast for the first time, you know, people need to get familiar with the fact that you are doing a podcast, and it will take you know, people time. You
know, what's really weird is I listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasting, which I do, and but what's really interesting is they talk about the fact that actually you might have, say, 100 people who are subscribed to your podcast, so it lands on their app, for example. But actually what you'll find is that there might be about 20 or so who listen to every episode, and people that just dip in and dip out depending on what the content is and stuff like that. So you have a different mix of listeners for each episode depending on what you're sharing and their time and their availability. So it's just making sure you kind of just keep going with the podcast promotion. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I dip in and out of I have podcasts that I listen to every episode of, and I have others that I dip in and out of. So yeah, it's that fluctuating audience and talking, which leads me neatly on to audience, which I've already touched on. Is one of the mistakes I see is people don't think about the audience, the listening experience if it's a podcast. You know, what is... Coming back to your point, Ayo, about having too many guests on a podcast, what's the listening experience going to be like? Are people going to be able to tell who's talking? And the audience is key to delivering on your goals, because you can have, you know, you could put on an event and think, I want to get, you know, I want to get leads from this, or I want, you know, people to be talking about it. But if the audience isn't engaged and interested, then they're going to walk away bored or deflated. You know, think about how you want your audience to feel. Do you want them to learn something? Do you want them to feel inspired? Do you want them to feel excited and upbeat at the end of your event? You know, think about things like timing. You know, have you got enough time for people to get a drink? You know, keep to your timing. You know, if you've told people that you are, you know, your discussion is going to be 45 minutes, make sure it's 45 minutes. People have expectations. You know, if they're expecting a 45-minute discussion, they want a 45-minute discussion. Coming back to your point that you made, Ayo, about leave on a high, leave them wanting more. There's nothing worse. I've been to panels where it's supposed to be 45 minutes and then they've just gone on and on and on. So think about we've all been there. We've all been to one of those panels, haven't we? But think about the audience experience, because if they're not having a good experience, then you're not going to deliver on any of your goals. Even if those goals are to get leads or whatever, it's not going to work.
I was actually also going to add to the audience part is also think about, like, what we always say with content is you talk about, you know, the call to action. What do you want them to do next? And I think, are you signposting them to download or, check out this report, or I'll put this story, I'll share a news story. Like we saw a great piece in the FT this morning that someone shared with us about panels, which we'll put in the comments after this event, but it's that kind of thing where you can kind of signpost people, this is what we'd like you to look at next, and here's some stuff that will help you, and then that will tie into your goals as well. So I think it's important to do that.
Yeah. And actually, Gavin's comment about consistent sound quality being a challenge on podcasts. Yeah, it is. It is, because not everybody has proper microphones and headphones. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that, Ayo, in terms of how do you navigate that as a podcast host?
I'm quite a stickler, surprisingly, and I write a full brief for people. For my guests, and I will say you need to be somewhere quiet, and you need to have headphones, and they can literally just be, the ones you get, or you used to get with mobile phones, like these ones that are just, the little ones. It can just be that, because I've got a little mic on it, and it's just stops the interference. So I'm quite a stickler on that, because if it's really noisy, it's just a horrible experience for the listener, and no one's going to enjoy it. You're not going to even enjoy editing it. So I think it's stuff like that. But you can also, like, for example, we had Sharon's on here, and she was coming on one of our lives before, and she doesn't have a mic. So I've got like little mini mics and stuff, which I gave her one of those. Literally, it's just like, that's like a little mini mic that goes in my rucksack. So I gave her one of those, and that's what she used. And so it's stuff like that you can do, or, you can kind of introduce just to make things a bit easier. But yeah, I kind of say to people, at least, even just those little headphones that you get with that you used to get with mobile phones and stuff, that will do. And they're like 20 quid in Argos. So yeah, I'm quite a stickler for sound.
Which kind of, well, talking about sound, do you want to talk about curating panels and guests? You've already alluded to having too many people on your
what, my bugbear?
Yes.
Yeah, curating
How do
panels.
You plan for this? Yeah.
All right, I guess we were talking about this as well earlier, and curating panels and guests to me is like thinking about the topic, who's interesting, and I think if you can, just go out and listen to people speak, like Google them, like think, right, actually, do they sound really, really dull and monotone? And well, what's their energy? How would they feel? And just think about that. And I think it's just doing some research into the people that you think might be your speakers. Googling them, seeing if they've got any examples about on YouTube or whatever, about where they've spoken before, listening to podcast interviews to see what they sound like. What do they talk about? Are they good? Do they come across well? So I think just be a bit more picky. Have enough time to find the best guests that you can. People's diaries get busy, so you want the best people, you're going to have to kind of factor that in. That's definitely good. And also think about the kind of different voices, the different messaging that people are going to have, and the different things that they're going to bring to the table. So yeah, and then I think for me, and this goes for podcasts and for any kind of content I produce, have a brief, have some outline questions, give them time. And if they don't feel comfortable, hop on a call for 15 minutes and make them feel comfortable. Because I know, like, for many of my podcast guests, they've never done any public speaking. So for me, I will give them a brief, and I'll say, if you want a 15-minute catch up beforehand, more than happy to do that, because it's about making them feel safe and secure, and then they'll perform the best that they can. So having that kind of structure in place for me is just really important for a panel and for a podcast as well. Anything you want to add, Stace?
Yeah, I would add, I mean, we've touched upon echo chamber guests, and like having a load of people on the, on your podcast or your panel that are all going to say similar things. So I think it's important to spend some time finding those other voices and thinking about what each of your guests is going to bring to the table, because it makes it a much more interesting discussion. I mean, I've got some great examples of this. I chaired a round table discussion on the future of business parks back when years and years ago, when I was a journalist. Oh no. And everybody around the table was involved in business parks, except apart from, they were all property people. They were all designing, developing, building, leasing business parks. And then we had a guest who was an occupier, who was just a business based on a business park. Now, everybody who was involved in business parks was saying, yes, the future of the business park is this and that, and it's going to be this, and we're going to offer this, and this is, and I noticed that the occupier wasn't saying anything. And so I went to the occupier and said, well, what do you think of all these things? Is this what you actually want as an occupier on a business park? And they turned around and said, no, actually, we don't want that. What we do want is this, and this. Suddenly we had a really interesting conversation. People around the table were all learning something. And I'm not saying, necessarily put in a curveball just for the sake of it, but think about those other voices in the conversation that are going to bring something to the table, that are going to come at it from a different angle.
Yeah, and I think that is it, isn't it? You kind of need that. But then you're also asking yourself, why? That means I don't do proper client feedback either. It's just like these business. What? It's like you need to listen to your customers. But that's like, that is a great example of like, yeah, you need to kind of think. But also, that's a good point though. As a host, it's also looking around and seeing who's not into the conversation, isn't it, and bringing them in, and also and just making sure that everyone's involved.
Yeah,
I think that's
which leads us neatly into. I'm conscious of time because we've got 4 minutes left, and
we're going to run over. Sorry,
we will not run over. So I just wanted to talk about how the hosting role is really, really important. So you need to be careful about, you need to have a good host. The host sets the tone for the conversation, for the panel. They are not there just to ask questions. They are there to manage the conversation, to make sure it's flowing, to make sure, bring in people that haven't been maybe saying very much, make sure everybody gets a good airing, good bit of airtime. They are there to keep to time, to make sure it all goes to time. When I was chairing panels at MIPIM, they have a countdown clock that only the people on the stage can see, and it starts flashing red when you get to within 2 minutes of the end of your session. They're really, really strict on timings, but the host is really important to the whole thing, to the conversation and how it goes on the day.
Yeah, and I think as well, sometimes, what's great is there are, and I'm like Diversity Talks Real Estate, for example, where they're training new people to become hosts and panelists and stuff. And there's like a number of courses now out there and things to help people do that, which I think is great. I think the one thing for me is sometimes seeing an inexperienced host not having enough questions, or like, when they just set up a panel and it's just one person, they ask one question to one person, that person just rambles on for 10 minutes with that really structured answer. So I think as a host, it's just knowing that you need to have like short, pithy questions to move the conversation on, and what your role is and how you keep it moving and interesting for the listener and whoever's listening or watching or whatever. That's my only thing to add on that bit.
We were going to talk about questions, but shall we jump to content? Because I think that is really, really important, given that we are getting close to kind of the end of our time.
Cool. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. Well, do you want to? Because
I think, like we said about the whole kind of repurposing thing, and just making sure you record any panels that you're doing so that you can turn it into other types of content. Same with the podcast, you can turn stuff into articles, which I hardly ever do, but should. LinkedIn posts, audio clips, video clips, and it's all about kind of building awareness. So really, really setting all of that up for you.
Yeah, you can use that for your promotion if you're doing, a podcast series. As Sharon's just said, 2 minutes. Stop it! I'm getting panicky now.
Red, it's flashing red. All right, we're going to break our rules and go slightly over if there's any questions.
Yes. We will answer any. We will stay on to answer any questions. Yeah, an event doesn't have to be one-off, and it shouldn't have to be a one-off. If you put lots of work and effort into creating event, there are so many things that you can do to keep that event living on. There are people that you can expand the audience. There are people that weren't there, that might be interested in what was discussed. And it's the same with a podcast. You can repurpose, splice, dice that content, put it into different formats. Not everybody is a podcast listener. I think they're weirdos if they're not, but not everybody is a fan of podcasts. I have to accept that.
No business parks.
But you can repurpose it and put it, as you say, turn it into an article, turn it into a series of LinkedIn posts, use that to promote the next one, or to, broaden your audience. because not everybody is going to be there on the day. Not everybody is going to be a fan of podcasts or want to listen or have the time to listen. They might just want a kind of a neat write-up. Has anybody got any questions?
I think there's one question from Barry Reed.
Do you find better coverage with audio only or video content? I mean, I think you can do both, really.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of podcast platforms now, you film it and you can put out little video clips of people talking.
Yeah,
as part of your repurposing and stuff. I mean, I think it's different. Like, for example, I would rather listen to an interview as a podcast than watch. I'm not going to watch an hour-long interview on video, but I would listen to an hour-long podcast interview. But everybody's different. Everybody has different preferences. Some people prefer video. So I think if you can do both, then yeah.
If you can do both, I think it's worth doing. And I think for that reason, like you just said, Stacey, that some people have different preferences. Some people are really audio, or when people might be like, when I do my walk, I listen to podcasts or whatever.
Yeah.
But some people are really into YouTube, and YouTube is huge. So I know you've just started doing interviews and small kind of video, Barry. So if you can do both, that's great. I would say, especially like platforms now like Spotify, even if you're not hosting with them, you can upload a video podcast to them now, like video and audio and stuff like that. So everyone's kind of starting to do that and giving people choice to listen in the way that suits them. And I think that's where we're going towards, is that, what works for you. That's what it is.
Yeah. And we've not every episode of these, but you've turned them into podcast episodes. So just stripped out the audio and turned it into a podcast episode. We do little short video clips, when we're actually getting our act together and actually doing everything that we should be doing.
Gets in the way, Stace. I
know. So, turning it, I always turn whatever we've talked about into articles, which then goes out on newsletters, which also goes on to LinkedIn, which gets made up into LinkedIn posts. So there's lots of different things that you can do. But just don't make it a one-off. You've got some people use the term hero content. An event or a podcast is a piece of hero content, and you can do so much with it, to fill lots of different other channels and lots of different formats. And it doesn't, it's not a massive amount of extra work. One of the things I always talk about is don't create new all the time. Do more with what you've already got.
Yeah, and do it a lot deeper and just do it better. I think, and that's a really good point to end on.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for your brilliant comments. We're only 2 minutes over. Is that all right, Sharon?
Shush, Sharon.
Is that okay? We're only 2 minutes over. I did say keep to time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your comments. If you do have any questions, do pop them in the comments. We can always come back to them. This will live as a replay on LinkedIn. So if you think anybody else might be interested or might find it useful, do share, because the replay will be available.
And it's also on YouTube as well, Barry, if you want to check that out. Yeah. We stream live to YouTube.
Ayo's YouTube channel.
Free on my computer. Cheers, Sharon. We're not here for hecklers.
There's always one, isn't there?
Awesome.
We'll be back in January in the new year with our next live. Don't know what the topic is yet. If you've got any ideas, we
need some, please.
Let us know. We always come up with something, but if you've got an idea of what you'd like to hear us talk about, then let us know. And
great, thanks a lot.
Are we allowed to say have a good Christmas? Is it too early to say that?
Yeah, do you know what? Let's go for it. We're not even in December. Let's annoy people. Happy
Christmas. Have a good break. Have a good festive season. Whatever you get it to.
See you out and about in town for the next month.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.